If you're looking at doing the palette knife technique for this project, you're gonna wanna have a lot of paint with you. I always start with like a whiter layer for my lighter backgrounds, and you're gonna use it just like you would a knife to spread butter or peanut butter. And I'm kind of gonna do it all over, just to get it sort of wet, almost prepping it, so that I can run other colors through it. If you run out of a color, especially for this, you're gonna be using up a lot more paint. You'll have to get some more. I've already run out, so I'm gonna go grab some more white over here. And you know, you're picking up, just like you would out of the butter jar or the peanut butter jar, you're taking a nice little scoop on there. And I'm not worried about getting things totally flat. It's okay if I cover my fruit. I can go back and redo it later if I need to with that transfer technique. And this is a noisier process, if you haven't noticed. Once I have that white in, then I can take just a little bit of the color I want in my background. And I can kind of just start working it in. Again, I'm not trying to get this totally smooth. I want it to look much more textured. That's the point of doing it this way. Make sure you're getting out to your edges, which means you'll get it back there on your table or your working surface. Again, you might want to have down newspaper or tape this to a board. It's getting a little too dark. You can go back in and add some more white. I'm going to add just a touch of purple to this one too. You can scrape, you can smush, go back in, add a little bit more white, just about like that. I gotta go through and put my table in down here. Prep that surface again with a little bit of white. You may prep it with a different color, you know, if you're thinking different colors for things. If you don't want as much white and you want it to be deeper and richer, you can use more colors. This is the edge of the table that faces us. I picked up a little red in there when I was scraping. That's all right. Just gonna leave it in there. Sort of like that. And then I'm gonna wipe those colors off because I wanna go back and work on the top, and I don't wanna be pulling that brown up into the top. But what I wanna do is define the back edge of that table just a little bit more where my fruit's sitting. So I'm gonna do that with the purple. And wipe that off so it's clear. Pick up a little bit more white. And just work that surface a smidge so that it's a little bit more defined again from the background. You can always also, if you have paint nearby, put it straight onto your canvas to work this technique as well. We're leaving it bumpy and textured. You don't have to worry about flattening everything out. So, a little too far down my edge, add a little bit more brown back in there. So you can just kind of futz with it, keep those colors going. I had a knot, I believe, down here at the bottom. Add that back in real quick. Don't want that to get lost. It's a nice little character feature. It's in there. There we go. Now I have to let this dry before I do any more work with it, and it's going to take a while because the paint is Let this dry. I've gone back and I've placed my fruit back on there because I covered them up when I was going through and adding those layers in before. And now we're going to go through and start adding in the same way. You're going to be spreading it as you work with it, and you want to kind of keep the direction that the fruit would go, which might mean some turning and twisting of your canvas as you go through it. This is getting a little heavy, so I'm going to pick some of that up and save it over here. And this apple's sideways, so I got to make sure it's sort of a starburst or a radial pattern coming out from the center while I'm putting this down with my palette knife. And you're going to see this is where some of the texture that you've already put down is going to start to show up as you're working with these different areas. Go through and add some of the other colors in there. We're keeping it pretty thick. You're not trying to thin things out. You're wanting to leave in the texture and the color differences You don't want to get all the blends in there, right? You want to keep it nice and informal while you're working on these. You can sort of work with the colors that are in there, so you can swap out your colors as you go through. Grab a little bit here. And I'm going to take off some of this red because my apple has a lot more going on in the yellow department on this side than it does in the red. Anytime I work into the red, I want to make sure I'm cleaning that brush off a little bit more, so it's not carrying too much red back up where I want the white to be. I have to grab a little bit more yellow. And really build that up because red's a strong color. So I'm going to build that up a lot. You can even add a little bit more back over here on the pear. And my pear has some browns in it, so I'm going to grab some more brown. A little bit of black to it, just because it's a darker color brown. Mix that on my palette, bring it on over, smudge it in. And then we have some of that same color back over here. And you can see as it dries, it starts getting a little chunky while you're working with it. Totally okay and allowable. If you want to make sure you're still catching some of the cast shadows down underneath, you can grab some of that other color that I've worked down here in the past. Right. Again, we're keeping this informal. You're using a palette knife, so it's going to look a little bit more abstract or impressionistic-like compared to other types of painting that you're doing. It's fun to experiment with, see if it's something you like. Always work some white back into there. All right, I have enough paint on here for this layer now. I'm gonna wait up there and do some dry time on that. I think I'm gonna add in a little bit more darker down here, just to give it a little bit more depth and interest. And a little bit more blue up here. So if I do light scratches like this, not a whole lot, I'll wipe it off, flip it over, use the larger side, kind of scratchy. I'll pick up some white and zip that white back through there. I picked up a little bit of yellow somewhere, probably was hanging out in my white. All right. Just gonna go with it. There's yellow in my fruit, so it kind of corresponds. This helps give it a little bit more depth in that background too. A little bit more movement. Whoops. Visual interest. Picked up some of the fruit there. I'm gonna scrape that up. I don't want that in there. Go back over with some of the white. Let this dry for a while before I work on it. Now this one's been drying for a little while, but it's still not quite all the way dry. I am going to go back in though with a little bit of that brown and just smear the stem in there. I think I'm going to add a little bit more cast shadow with just a smidge of black in here. I'm not really gonna do a whole lot more to this painting, simply because that's the nature of working with a palette knife. You can't get super specific and high details with things, but you can go back in and you can add in a little bit more color to the areas that you would like. As it's drying, if it's really thick too, you can always go back in and do a little work to move paints around or to lift it up, even off the canvas if you would like to, or back from some areas in to the others. So I'm gonna add a little bit more red. So I scrape some off, and then I move sideways with my palette knife. Again, trying to spread on top of what's already starting to dry. Go through and scrape it a little. I don't want to do too much more to this though. Like I said, I'm pretty happy with how it's already turned out. Just a little bit more back here to indicate the red of that apple. And then the yellow right here where it's the brightest. The same thing over here. And then they did have some white spots on them from the reflection on the wax. So I'm going to go through and add that in too. Again, I don't want to work it out too much. I want it to be present in there. And I am going to leave it just like this as a finished product.